Birth, aging, sickness, and death form an inescapable life trajectory for every human being. We can perceive the joys and sorrows and the myriad facets of human life between life and death, yet we know nothing of the chaos before our arrival and the nothingness after our passing. If we cannot fathom where we come from and where we are bound, how can we define the meaning and value of our existence in this life? If we cannot see the road ahead or discern the shape of the future, how can we judge whether every choice and every effort we make in the present holds any real weight? It is this ignorance of humanity's collective past and future that has made "what is the meaning of life?" an ultimate question etched into human self-awareness. A question to which we have never been able to offer an objective answer over the millennia. Thus, some find a spiritual haven in various ideological systems to ease the anxiety brought by this question. Religious believers hold that God created the universe and humanity, and every word and deed in the world will determine their eternal destination after death. Some believe the meaning of life lies in the companionship of family, the fellowship of close friends, and the understanding with loved ones. It is love that gives existence warmth. Others argue that the very existence of life is reason enough to cherish it. Yet in the eyes of nihilists, all of this is mere illusion. Life is inherently meaningless, and all our striving and suffering, joy and grief are nothing but empty talk without any value. This is the core of nihilism. It is a philosophy centered on nothingness. At some point in life, many of us have stumbled upon nihilistic thoughts, overwhelmed by a sudden sense of meaninglessness, finding life dull and our own existence devoid of any intrinsic value. This feeling usually arises when we begin to question our old beliefs but have not yet built new spiritual pillars. At that moment, we break free from the conceptual constraints of our parents and past experiences and slowly construct our own worldview as we learn new things and gain life experience. And the starting point of all this reflection is often a simple question: why? The word is enough to make those foundations we once saw as the bedrock of our lives begin to crumble, sinking into quicksand, dragging us into the abyss of confusion. You suddenly begin to doubt that your life may not be what you've always understood it to be. If you pause and examine the core values you hold as gospel, asking again and again why you believe in them, where they came from, who shaped them, you will eventually reach a dead end, a confrontation with the void itself. Throughout all the religious texts of humanity and across the farthest reaches of scientific exploration, the question why remains an unsolvable mystery. And it is from this lack of an answer that the nihilist draws their conclusion. There is no why, no ultimate answer. All is empty. As Alan Watts once put it, life is just a journey from the maternity ward to the crematorium. The essence of nihilism has long been hidden in its name. The word derives from the Latin nihil, which means nothing, and the suffix ism denotes a doctrine, a complete ideological system. Together, they form a philosophy that espouses nothingness. Yet, etymology alone is not enough to truly grasp its core. People often confuse nihilism with pessimism, but in reality, the two are worlds apart. Pessimists are convinced that the worst outcome will always come to pass. They view the world with a negative eye and fixate on the dark side of life, believing that evil will ultimately triumph over justice. But in essence, pessimists acknowledge the existence of beauty in the world. They merely argue that humanity lacks the ability to achieve it, at least not completely. Nihilists, however, are a completely different breed. They reject all value judgments, believing neither in absolute evil nor pure goodness in the world. In their eyes, the world is merely an objective existence. Morality is a human invention for the sake of living, and the concepts of good and evil are nothing but man-made definitions. There is no better metaphor for this than the half glass of water. An optimist sees the glass as half full, a pessimist as half empty, but a nihilist would say to pour the whole glass out. What does it matter if the glass is full or empty? All criteria for judgment, be it good and evil, beauty and ugliness, gain and loss, are meaningless, for in the end, everyone will die. Beyond pessimism, nihilism is also often compared with cynicism and apathy. Yet their essences remain distinctly different. In fact, pinning down one's own thoughts to a precise category is far more difficult than we imagine. Cynics argue that all human behavior is ultimately driven by egoism. They do not believe in pure kindness, are disillusioned with the human species, and hold that we are all self-serving beings scurrying for our own interests. But the very notion that humans are not inherently good proves that cynics believe beauty is a real existence. It just never manifests in humans. For nihilists, however, there is no such thing as good and evil in the world. They do not believe human nature is inherently evil, nor do they hold it to be inherently good, for these traits are merely labels humans attach to the world, not objective realities. Apathetic people are in a different state entirely. They do not deny the meaning of life. They simply care nothing for it, letting life drift along with the tide. The core of nihilism, though, is the denial of any grand blueprint or predetermined purpose in the world. There is no belief worth clinging to, and thus life itself is meaningless. This creates the paradox of nihilism. If you believe in nothingness, then that very nothingness becomes the belief you hold fast to. And once you have a belief, you are no longer a true nihilist, for its very essence is to believe in nothingness. Another fundamental difference between nihilism and other philosophical schools lies in its origin. It first emerged from literary creation before gradually evolving into a philosophical doctrine. For this reason, unlike other philosophical systems, it has no clear and unified definition. Different people interpret it in different ways, and these interpretations have finally been categorized and integrated to form different branches of nihilism. Political nihilists argue that for humanity to achieve species development and progress, it must break down the existing political, social, and religious orders and seek new possibilities from the ruins. Ethical nihilists deny the existence of absolute ethics and moral values, holding that the definitions of good and evil are merely social conventions. To achieve true individual freedom, one should not be bound by these man-made rules, and following one's heart is the only principle. The most well-known and representative branch, however, is existential nihilism, the focus of our discussion, whose core tenet is this: life itself has no inherent value and no predetermined meaning. In the eyes of nihilists, the state, religious groups, and even public moral norms are all infringements on individual freedom. If we cannot do what we want as we please, is the so-called freedom merely an illusion? Are we always bound by invisible spiritual shackles, yet unable to explain where they come from? I once came across a question online. If given the chance, would you save your pet or a stranger? The vast majority of people answer that they would save their pet. When someone questions the rationality of this choice, the usual retort is, what makes you think a human life is more valuable than an animal's? No one has ever been able to give a convincing answer to this question. People can only speak evasively and avoid the heart of the matter, and the core question of why remains unsolved after all. This is exactly the point nihilists want to make.
If we cannot explain why we are bound by these established rules, then why choose to abide by them? Perhaps the answer lies in the fear of nothingness. Once we admit that life is inherently meaningless, confusion about our existence and emotional suffering follow in its wake. Imagine if all our efforts were in vain. Humanity's scientific achievements and technological breakthroughs, every step forward in space exploration, every struggle in the human rights movement, all the progress and glory we have forged along the way, they would be nothing but fleeting specks of dust in the vast river of the universe, leaving no trace at all. When we realize that the ups and downs, joys and sorrows of life will all ultimately return to nothingness, we come to understand that there is no need to force ourselves to comprehend this complicated world. It is better to watch the myriad facets of life with a calm and detached heart.
Friedrich Nietzsche is the philosopher who offered the most unique interpretation of nihilism, and he held a contradictory attitude of both supporting and criticizing this philosophy. From a supportive perspective, he argued that beyond the social order and value systems humans have constructed for themselves, there are no objective structures or laws in the world. He once said, "Every belief, every judgment that takes something to be true is inherently false, for there is no such thing as a real world." In his view, the value of nihilism lies in shattering the illusion of all human beliefs and truths, exposing them as nothing more than products of a flawed Western mythological system. His famous pronouncement, "God is dead," is the ultimate expression of this view. The God here is not the divine being in a religious sense, but a metaphor for the absolute authority wielded by the religious order of his time. It also symbolizes the moment when people began to break free from this authority, no longer blindly following mainstream values, and instead seeking the meaning of life on their own. At the same time, however, Nietzsche was deeply worried about the prevalence of nihilism. He believed that in the centuries to come, nihilism would push human civilization to the brink of disaster and lead it to ruin, like a river that has reached its end. Throughout human history, the most destructive periods of civilization have always been accompanied by the collapse of traditions, cultural heritage, belief systems, religious institutions, and even financial systems crumble. And nihilistic thoughts creep in and spread in such a soil. Imagine if nothing matters, and we are merely random combinations of fleeting atoms. Then on what objective basis can we judge Hitler to be one of the most evil men in history? After all, in his mind, he was merely trying to eliminate a single nation. In our hearts, we all know such acts are evil. But the danger is that we cannot logically explain this feeling, and thus can never convince others to agree with this judgment. This is precisely what Nietzsche feared. To this day, some still blame Nietzsche for the rise of the Nazi era, for he continued to espouse nihilistic ideas even as he foresaw its dangers. But people overlook the fact that Nietzsche always believed that if humanity could survive the civilizational collapse brought about by nihilism, it would open up a completely new path of development. In his view, for humanity to move forward, it must build a new moral system, one that abandons the prejudices and shackles of the past. Ultimately, tearing down an old house does not mean being homeless. It means having the chance to build a bigger and better home. Looking at the present, especially the various phenomena on social media, it is not hard to see that humanity may be facing another outbreak of nihilism. Religion is no longer the sole arbiter of moral standards. People are beginning to abandon long-held beliefs and cultural customs, instead seeking their own paths in life. Today, no matter how vile or unreasonable an act may seem to you, there will always be a group of people defending it, claiming they have the right to do whatever they want. And we can never refute them, for the core question remains unsolved. Why not? Humanity will keep crossing established moral boundaries time and again, until one day we can no longer accuse others of making wrong choices. After all, who is to say what is wrong? Shakespeare once wrote in his work, "Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." If life truly has no predetermined meaning, and our existence no innate purpose, then the best response is to live as we wish in this seemingly meaningless world. There is no need to fuss over whether the glass is half full or half empty. We can simply throw the glass away and walk straight to the faucet to drink our fill until we are content. Because in the final analysis, the very existence of life is the greatest meaning of living, and all other meanings will ultimately be created by us slowly in the course of life.